And I'm very happy to welcome Mr. Aidan Ryan. Give him a warm applause.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you here today. I work in an agency called the European Union Network Information Security Agency. The agency has been in existence since 2004 and is based in sunny Crete and Athens. So that was one of the reasons I was attracted to move from Dublin to Greece, as you can imagine with the weather that we have in Ireland. The agency is relatively small. It has 100 people, and its mandate, which is based in legislation, is to raise awareness, try and bring Europe together, and to address cybersecurity on a European context. As the last speaker indicated, cybersecurity is one of these complex areas, and what makes it particularly challenging is the cross between national sovereignty issues, cross-border issues, and the collective responsibility for Europe, where other member states are affected by cyber incidents. Roughly what we do, I have a number of slides. There are 4 verbs which I would put forward as being the way to deal with cybersecurity. The first one is awareness raising, to know what's going on, try and deal with the known unknowns, and try and get into the space of the unknown unknowns. Build trust, both nationally and internationally. Develop cooperation models, and be prepared to share information. And it is this last point which is probably the most difficult for organizations. There is a natural human psychology that if you have a problem, keep it tight, solve it yourself, tell nobody. This does not work in the cyber area, and you will see that a number of pieces of European legislation are trying to address these 4 verbs, put it on a statutory footing, and try and accelerate those issues which were not happening voluntarily. So overall, we look at doing exercises. I'll talk about it later on. We do comprehensive exercises on an international basis every 2 years. We develop policy. We have developed position papers on, for example, encryption and the challenge of balancing the right to privacy against the right to law enforcement to see what's going on in communications. And we work with our colleagues in Europol in these type of activities. On a technical level, we produce many, many reports that deal with the new emerging threats. And if you're involved in the new technologies that are now driving our homes, our hospitals, our critical infrastructures, these reports are relevant. Some of them are highlighted here. They deal with transport, health, smart grids, and for the critical infrastructure area, you have SCADA, the control systems, the computer systems that control our networks. And we see a move. When I started my career, most of these networks were proprietary equipment. There was no central control center. The intelligence and control was distributed out far away from the control room. Nowadays, we demand convenience, and the risk associated with convenience is that you need security, and sometimes security is not there by design. It is often put in afterwards, and of course it has a cost, and it may not be optimal. So we have many reports, and if you're in the critical infrastructure area or in the smart area, please, I would refer you to it. One of my aims here is today to drive you to the website to look at the information that's there. There is a lot of information. It's all public. It's very transparent, and I hope you find it useful. Again, just to focus on SCADA because it's particularly important to infrastructure, we work with information sharing groups where we bring the electrical people together, the nuclear people, the aviation people, all of these different sectors together to try and build trust, share information, learn lessons, develop policies, and then do the implementation. It's an ongoing task, it's cyclic, it never stops. As an example, the electronic identity legislation that has gone through Europe. The bottom line is the 4 principles that we need to have security, we need to be aware of what's going on, and the obligation to share breaches. And this theme runs through all of the pieces of legislation that I'm going to talk about today. Again, in the telecoms area, this was one of the first areas to address the telecoms package, which was done a number of years ago. It talked about having mandatory reporting. That reporting must come to NIS. NIS anonymize the information coming to us, and then we publish the information in terms of major outages. So you can see from 2011 up to 2015, the number of outages has grown in the telecom sector. However, I can say most of those outages, when you analyze them, are not due to cyber attacks at the moment. They're generally due to software upgrades, human problems, and so on. But at least we have a reporting mechanism every year. We see what's going on, and the trends can be shared across member states. Internet of Things, smart. This is coming at us very, very quickly. We all want the functionality of what Internet of Things has to offer. We buy them for our homes. You can now go on the internet, Alibaba, any of these websites, and buy beautiful high-definition cameras that tilt, pan. You can record the video, you can have the video to your mobile phone, all for $25. The real question is, what security is built in behind it? How protected is it? Where do we balance our convenience against our privacy? Similarly, we're looking at airports, we're looking at factories. The next generation of 4.0 in industry is going to deploy more and more of these tools. And the question we're putting to industry is, we need security by design, not at the later level where you're bolting it on, where it's more expensive, not as effective, and leads to problems we shouldn't have. Again, the same principle here, smart cars. A lot of energy is going into the smart cars. We've seen publications of the cars being hacked remotely via Wi-Fi connections. Our cars are little computers at this stage. They're running more and more technology. They're running more and more information, and our planes and so on. So we need to be able to control this information and use it and handle it properly. Other assistances we give to member states, at the moment we're doing some work with the current presidency of the European Union with the Maltese. We give demonstrations, and if the member states invite us, we support and give demonstrations to policymakers and support conferences like this, where we demonstrate remote locking, man-in-the-middle attacks, malware being sent to computers and phones where you can open up microphones and do video remotely unknowing to the person. So we're developing expertise with the view to sharing, demonstrating and helping policymakers. As part of our reaching out to bring people together, we have set up many expert groups, and we bring them together to try and develop the policies, tease out the issues and recommend ways forward. In the privacy area, one of our pet projects, we have a small team, and we've developed tools called PETs, Privacy Enhancing Tools. Many of these tools are on the internet. Anybody can download them. What we have done to help people is we've done an analysis on these tools, and we've published where we believe their strengths are and where their weaknesses are, and then it's up to the users to decide, do you want to use them, do you not want to use them? On encryption and cryptography, as I mentioned earlier, we have developed policy papers. As an internal market agency, not a security agency, our position has been to encourage strong encryption. We have been against the argument for backdoors, and the reason is that these backdoors we feel can be exploited by the criminals and undermines the whole trust element of it. So we have position papers on our website. If you're interested, they have all the arguments and supports the conclusions we have come to. Again, the security of personal data. SMEs are now in a difficult situation in that they have their traditional business models where they have their computer in the corner of the room. All their data was there. They had the costs of running their IT networks. We now see people moving towards the cloud. And for small companies, it is very difficult often to know what are the complexities and challenges of using the cloud from a security perspective. We have produced reports to help SMEs in this space and to address some of the issues. Certification in Europe is now becoming one of the big issues. Certification of equipment from a security perspective is not standardized. It is seen now as an opportunity for European industry to get together and use security as an economic enabler and to have the first mover advantage on security. So ANISA is sitting down at the moment with European industry, looking at the frameworks that are in existence, trying to come up with models to address security and find a solution that will help European industry and help the products that are produced in Europe to address the security needs. Moving on to one of our flagship projects. Every year we produce a threat landscape report. It's one of our best sellers. It's available on the website, doesn't cost anything. If you're interested in the latest threats and what is happening, it is a Bible where there is a lot of information and all the information is referenced. So what ANISA does is it gathers all the public information that it can get or that people are prepared to share with it and produces an annual report. The report changes every year. Last year, there was no mention, or the year before, 2015, of fake news. Internet of Things attacks hadn't matured. This year, we see these new events happening. If there was some conclusions to be drawn from this year's report, and I urge you to read it, is the whole concept of monetization of cybercrime. A lot of money is now being made by cybercrime in the form of ransomware. It's estimated, some of the reports, over $1 billion is being made out of ransomware. We have seen hospitals close down due to their network, their ICT network being encrypted and not being able to get access to it. We've seen hotels with electronic locks in Europe where the locks were disabled and nobody could get into their rooms. And in most cases, people are paying. They have no option and they're living with the risk of what's going on. Denial of service attacks. The world had a new form of attack there last year with the Mirai botnet. And what made this attack different was our simple little devices that we have at home, I mentioned earlier, the Internet of Things, our cameras, even our mouse traps now. There you can buy mouse traps that when a mouse comes into it, it'll send a radio signal to your computer saying, mouse trap activated. They're all connected. They're all connected to the internet. But what happened here with the attackers was they got all these devices, pooled them together, the resources attached to these simple devices, and that became a weapon when all of the bandwidth was connected and the level of attack exceeded 1 terabit. And there are not many companies in the world today that can withstand that level of attack. And it really illustrated a principle that cyber weapons are no longer the domain of big companies or big states, that little devices can be pooled together, and this was the nature of the first attack. What made it even worse was the source code was released on the internet a short time afterwards. We have the likes of exploit kits. Cybercrime has now become a service. The cyber criminals are writing software with drop-down menus, and you click what you want to do, what nature of attack you want to do, the size of the attack. And the price of all of these services has come down significantly. The price is basically insignificant at this stage. Other examples of cyber attacks is that 1/3 of attacks are being delivered via VPNs. So when you look at the IP address, you're not actually looking at the IP address of the attacker. It's a compromised computer or it's somebody else. So the chances of the law enforcement finding out and getting attribution against the people who are doing these attacks is getting more and more difficult every day. In terms of some of the big figures, there's estimated to be 400 million bad URLs on the web and 270 million suspicious websites, so that when you go onto these websites, you run the risk of malware being downloaded onto your computer, for example, with water holing. The malware samples last year exceeded 600 million per quarter. Some of these malware samples lasted less than 1 hour. So you can run antivirus on your computer, gives you a certain amount of protection, but it is unlikely that a specific customized piece of malware that only lasts an hour, your service provider is unlikely to be able to catch that. So the area is getting more complex and getting more difficult. If I look at the threat agents here and the cyber threat taxonomy. Taxonomy is a word in English that is used to define a group or a set of people. And in cybersecurity, what NIS has been trying to do is categorize and standardize how people deal with cyber incidents. So you've got hostile people and you've non-hostile people looking at your networks. But if the hostile people are looking at it, you have to categorize them. Is it a researcher? Is it an ethical hacker? Is it a security agency, law enforcement, cyber soldier? There are many new words coming into the dictionary, and when people talk to one another, they need to have a clear understanding of what space they're in. On the hostile side of it, you have paid agents, maybe for espionage reasons. You may have socially motivated attacks. You may have ideologically motivated attacks, profit-orientated, or just motivated citizens. So depending on what category you're dealing with, the response and the response agency may be different. So the time to consider these different definitions is now, and have the various response mechanisms and how you share information between the response people is an issue that should be addressed before the incident happens. The main conclusion of our threat landscape report is every year we look at the different threat vectors, we identify the trends and which way they're going. And I gave you the statistic earlier of the amount of malware that's being produced. Malware has been up there for 2015, 2016, and we see the different aspects going up and down. It's in the report. I really recommend that if you have an interest in this area to have a look at it. Botnets, big change in botnets last year because of the Mirai attack. But also law enforcement has been very active in botnets, and a number of major botnets were taken down. So the situation is continuously changing, but this is a nice summary for those that are interested. So the threat landscape, we have it for all of the years. You'll see the evolving trend. Going into some of the more technical areas, we have some themes which we identify that experts and people dealing with critical infrastructure may need to consider. We have a specific report on hardware. Is the chips coming in? Is there enough certification on the chips? Is the firmware safe? Is the firmware encrypted? There was a report in the New York Times. Yesterday I read it on the plane on the way over. It related to Apple, and it related to malware being put on the firmware. And once it was on the firmware, updating it didn't work, didn't get rid of the malware. So the whole concept of the embedded software that's running at the lowest level on your network is detailed in the report. So these reports look at internet infrastructure, they look at the smart grid, big data, and the latest one that we came out was machine-to-machine communications, which is the next growth area, particularly on mobile, where very short messages are going to be sent forward, such as in smart meters, traffic control systems, and so on. Exercises is another major project which we run. As I mentioned earlier, every 2 years we run them. We started off doing exercises in one sector. Our exercises now have migrated into multi-sector and are dealt with at the technical level, the media level, and the political level. In the exercise we ran this year, we had over 1,000 participants, and in one country, their Prime Minister felt it was so serious, he actually participated in the exercise to simulate the political response. We have developed a platform to help people deliver exercises. This is open to people in the member states, particularly if you're a critical infrastructure operator, to come to us and we will show you what we have, and we're gladly prepared to share it with you. So, cooperation. I mentioned it earlier. The whole concept that comes out of the exercises and then is going to be embedded in legislation that I will talk about later is cyber crisis planning, on-demand cyber response, crisis management at the different levels, the technical, the media, and the political level, and then international cooperation. And Norway participated in the exercise. All the EU member states participated in the exercise that we've just completed, and the report is going to be available on that exercise next month. So coming back to the Network Information Security Directive. The directive took 4 years to be drafted. That illustrated the struggle that there is between national sovereignty and sharing at a European level. The data protection regulation also took 4 years. So these things are not easy. It takes a while to build up trust, even to get the legislation, never mind deliver what the legislation asks you to do. So the NIS Directive was adopted in August 2016, and member states that are subject to the obligation to transpose have got until the 9th of May 2018 to do it. But there's a number of actions which have already started to try and accelerate the process. This slide captures what the NIS Directive is about. At the top part of it, it obliges every member state to have a national strategy. Some countries have only just prepared their national strategy. Others, like the UK, talk about revising their strategy in the light of the new threats. Once the strategy is done, we have a number of critical infrastructures that have been identified. So if you are a member of these critical infrastructures, you are going to be obliged to report major incidents. And to assist on the reporting of major incidents and also the benchmarking of minimum security requirements, a number of groups have been set up. At the more political level, we have the Cooperation Group. It is chaired by the European Commission, and it looks at the high-level issues of cooperation, how well the strategies are working, what needs to be done, and there's a feedback mechanism in the directive to review what's going on over the next few years. At the technical level, we have the CSERT network. And this directive obliges every member state to have a CSERT network, and in the annex of the directive, it specifies what skills it's meant to have, abilities, and technical requirements. On the digital services provider, we don't have the telecoms market in because that has already been addressed in previous legislation. But the new aspects of criticality in terms of cloud computer operators, search engines, and online marketplaces fall within the digital service providers, and they are classified as an operator of essential service. So the areas have been identified, the groups have been set up by statute, and now the work is only beginning to make this work. The timeline is quite long, as you can see. Starts February 27th, the Cooperation Group and the CSERT network has had its first formal meeting. It goes on then to the transposition, the identification of operators of essential service. It's up to each country to draw up the list, but there is an interest that each country does a similar approach so that operators of essential service, and they're generally defined in terms of how many people are affected if there's an outage, how long does it take, and the impact in society. These are subjective measures, but what we're trying to do in Europe is harmonise this approach. And then towards the end, there will be a review 57 months later, 3 years after transposition, to see is it working. It's a long time. It just reflects the difficulty Europe is having in doing this at a European level. So our role and contribution here is providing assistance to the member states, identifying good practice, facilitating the exchange of best practice, and feeding and supporting the various architectures and infrastructures that are created under this directive. To start this work, we have produced 2 reports. The first one is incident notification for digital service providers. It's available on the website. And then we've also done a report on the technical guidance for the implementation of minimum security requirements for digital service providers. So the work has started. This is now being analysed by the operators, and the detail of the legislation will be supplemented by what's called implementing acts. That will go down into the detail of what needs to be done and how it is to be done. And those implementing acts are now getting ready to be prepared. We have the cooperation group, CG, we have the European Commission, we have member states. So ENISA is sitting in the middle trying to assist these groups to bring them together to deal with incident reporting, the minimum security requirements, the identification of the operators of essential services, and what's associated with that. So the subgroups have been created. These subgroups are driven by the member states. ENISA is playing a facilitatory role. The Commission is also playing a supporting role. So in the Security Measures Group, France are leading it, the identification of criteria, Germany, and in the incident reporting subgroup, the Netherlands. They're relatively new groups. If you're not there, it's of an interest. Either coordinate through your CERT community or come to us that you have access and know what's going on. It's a changing role at the moment. So if we go specifically to the directive, the boring part is Article 9, if you're interested in the CCERT, it defines the framework. Annex 1 lists what is required from the CCERT, and every member state is obliged to have one. And then the sectors and entities on the different operators of essential services are listed in Annex 2. The CCERT network are the technical people. They're the ones that are going to share the operational information. So a few questions. Why? Really, it's about building trust. Composition, you have the various players there, the member states, the CERT EU, the European Commission, and ENISA supporting. And then you have the various tasks, how the group will perform its tasks, and it's open season. The groups are only meeting now, and they're defining their own rules to get buy-in and get the necessary support. This is not about bringing in people, hanging them out and saying you're a bad boy, you're not doing it right. It's about building trust and building support. They make their own rules to see what they're comfortable with. So a number of meetings have taken place. The legislation said that the first formal meeting must take place in February. It took place on, I think, February the 24th. The next meeting is going to coincide with Estonia's presidency. It will be in a venue to be defined by them. But the doors are open at the moment in terms of the number of people. It hasn't been formalised. If it's something that's you're interested in, talk to your own CERT people and see should you be at the table. So the work plan moving forward with the CERT network is build infrastructure. There's two pieces of infrastructure being looked at the moment. First of all, an initial way to share information between CERTs. And a more long-term project is called the Connected European Facility, the CEF platform, and that is being designed at the moment as a peer-to-peer network between CERTs to allow information to be exchanged in a secure way that can't be monitored, and the whole design of that network is currently being prepared. The type of information that's going to be shared, it will take time. It will start basic. It's all voluntary. And hopefully, when trust builds up, the quality of the information will change, develop a more mature model, and then the technical people will feed into the cooperation group, which is the more political element of the directive in terms of what needs to be done. So, in conclusion, all of these directives is about making information available, sharing information, building trust. Some sectors are moving faster than others, some are more adaptable. That's life. But the principle is exactly the same. We're at the early stage. For those that want to get involved in the working groups and so on, the doors are still open. So if you need any further information, come to ENISA and we'll put you in contact with the relevant expert. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Quick question. Someone in the audience asks, the mobile phone is today a complete computer with more access points than a PC. Should we leave the responsibility for protecting it in cyber to the operators?
To the operators or to the manufacturers? Both have a role, and the concept of certification for mobile devices is also part of the whole cyber threat landscape. So while if you look at iPhone, you look at Android, they're global players, it makes it difficult for Europe to come up with a solution. However, we can't rule out that if Europe identifies standards associated with this, that Europe will take the lead and that the rest of the world will follow. And we already have a proven example of mobile success with Europe designing the GSM standard. We were the first to do national roaming, roaming across member states, and the GSM standard became the de facto. So Europe has a good tradition in the mobile area, in this area.
Several questions about the UN and the role of the UN. Do you see a bigger role for the UN in regulating here?
There is a debate which has two sides, and it relates to internet governance as well. The two are not completely separate. One model says industry should drive, innovation should be driven, there should be minimum intervention from governments. The UN model probably has a role that the internet should be regulated a little bit more. There's various forums which are working at this at an international level, the Internet Governance Forum. I don't think there's any clear answer. We have to work together. The UN has a very strong role to bring countries outside Europe up to speed. It is a good vehicle to try and increase training and help Europe. And in that way, that forum is very strong, but it's work in progress. Mm-hmm.
And someone comments, people and companies do pay when ransomware. Why not more transparency and learning of incidents?
This is what this debate is about. Share the incidents, use your CERT community, learn from the experiences, and it's only by sharing that we, as a community, can try and address this problem. Mm. Individuality is the actual success of the cyber criminal. Sharing is the only way to attack back.
And finally, when you set up the Irish National Cybersecurity Centre, you chose to include the private sector, business. Why? And is that something you would recommend?
Coming from a small country, I sit and look at my neighbours across the way and I see the large resources they have. In Ireland, we didn't have the same level of resources. We have the exact same challenges. Ireland was probably fortunate in that we have a lot of the major infrastructure providers, Facebook, Microsoft, Symantec, on our doorstep. The approach I took at the time, it's going back about 6 years, is to take an integrated approach. A lot of the knowledge is sitting in the private sector. It's very difficult for the public sector to keep up. The private sector have more resources, they're dedicated, they're specialised in the area. And to have a more of an effective role, the view I had was to bring all the stakeholders together, bring law enforcement, bring the military, bring the civil cert, and then the operators who own and control this infrastructure to sit at a table. And when you have these people together and the trust has been built up, and it does take 1 year to 2 years for the trust to build up, the effectiveness of the response vastly outweighs an individual approach.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Aidan, Ryan.
Thank you.